We begin today on the death of Alexei Navalny. Early this morning, the Russian prison where he was being detained released a statement saying Navalny felt unwell after a walk, lost consciousness, and died shortly after. The statement said attempts to save his life failed. Navalny was 47 years old. Alexei Navalny had long been one of the most vocal critics of Russian President Vladimir Putin and was once considered the only person with a chance of challenging Putin in an election. Navalny first made a name for himself through a blog that took aim at corruption in Russia's government. In December 2011, he led large protests in Moscow against Vladimir Putin, and for the rest of his life, Navalny was in and out of Russia's most notorious jails, a target of multiple poisoning attempts, and had his organizations labeled extremist. In the months leading up to his death, Navalny was moved to a maximum security prison in Russia's Arctic. Canada's ambassador to the United Nations reacted strongly to reports of Navalny's death, saying Putin murdered Navalny just as surely as if he'd strangled him with his bare hands. Bob Rae is Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, and he joins me now. Ambassador Rae, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, David.
That was a strong reaction you had to this news. How do you think Canada and other countries should respond to what's happened here?
Well, I don't know how else one can respond to something like this. It's a genuine atrocity. Navalny was poisoned, left the country, barely survived because in a German hospital, and then having recovered, decided that he would go back. Knowing what risk he was taking, and of course he was arrested as soon as he got off the plane. So his conditions in prison have been impossible. His sentences kept getting lengthened. He was in solitary confinement. He was in one of these places where they keep the lights on all day and all night. He couldn't eat properly. He had lots of health issues, and he died as a result. And all of that happened because that's what President Putin wanted to happen. And so I think any sensible person would say Putin is responsible for that, just as he was responsible for the death of Boris Nemtsov, just as he was responsible for the death of a great many people who've been bumped off, thrown out of windows, mysteriously died in their hotel rooms, poisoned in London parks. I mean, it's unbelievable what this guy has done and what his regime continues to do. Plus, he's killed probably about 250,000 of his own soldiers, let alone the tens of thousands who've been killed in Ukraine, innocent civilians. So this is not a good government in Russia at the moment. He's leading a vicious empire that's carrying out a neo-colonial attack on Ukraine and is disrupting life in many, many other countries in Africa and Asia and elsewhere. So he deserves strong words. That's what he should get, and even more than that, actually.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said today that Russia needs to answer all the serious questions about Navalny's death. What facts do you think need to be established around this, and do you think the world will ever get those answers from Russia?
No, we'll never get those answers any more than Stalin told us what he did to Raoul Wallenberg, or the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of other people, or the millions of people who died in the Gulag. We'll never get answers from Russia. Russia is the successor of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Empire killed millions of people, and Russia is killing millions of people. There's no way you can sort of sit back and say, please give us your answers. He's given us his answer. His answer is he kills people who gets in his way. That's what he does. And that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a dictator who is responsible for the deaths of millions of people.
This happens on a day when a lot of world leaders are gathered in Munich for the security conference that happens there. There's been some speculation that that timing is not coincidental. What message do you think Navalny's death sends to the world and says about Russia's current place in the world?
Well, I don't think Russia cares. I don't think Russia cares very much what we think. And I don't think they care very much about what other people say. I think what Russia cares about is what we do. And I think the worrisome moment we're in right now is, do we take this dictator seriously enough? And are we prepared to do enough to stop him? It's not enough for us to say, gee, it's too bad, we're waiting for answers from Mr. Putin. You'll never get answers from Putin. What we have to do is stop him in his tracks. And that's really what this next few weeks are all about. Whether NATO and the United States and Canada and other countries can do more than we're currently doing to stop what Putin is doing. That's what we have to do. And those are the questions that we have to answer.
The answers to that question, though, Mr. Ray, don't seem very clear, at least from the United States perspective at this point. You know, President Biden is struggling to get that aid package through Congress. It's being held up by House Republicans, seemingly at the behest of former President Trump. I mean, do you think the West will respond in the way that I would suspect you hope it will if America can't get this through?
Well, I hope I've made myself very clear. I hope it's not just you hope that I do say. I firmly believe, David, I firmly believe that a victory for Putin of any kind would be a disaster for the West, for our values, and for our security. And I've been saying this publicly and privately ever since the invasion of Ukraine. And I think we need to understand what we're dealing with. I think we need to understand this level of seriousness with which Russia takes this struggle. And if we don't match him with our own seriousness and our own capabilities, then we're in deep trouble. And the American Congress has its responsibilities. So does the government of Canada. So does all of Europe. So does NATO itself. We all have to respond, and we have to respond more effectively in order to stop Putin from what he's doing.
The Russian embassy here in Ottawa, their embassy to Canada, reacted earlier today, saying the death of a Russian citizen is strictly Russia's matter. Thus, we urge Canada to stop interfering in our internal affairs. Do you have any response to that?
Well, best of luck to them for that. The death of Navalny is a world event, and they can say whatever they want. We will continue to say this. We will continue to speak out. And Canada needs not only to speak out in defense of freedom, but we also need to act in defense of freedom. So no, Mr. Navalny's death is not an internal Russian matter. The collapse of Russian democracy is a tragedy for Russia. It's also a tragedy for the world. And the replacement of democracy by a very aggressive Russian empire is potentially catastrophic for all of Russia's neighbors. And indeed for the security of the world. So we have every reason to speak out, but more importantly, we have every reason to act, and that's what we have to keep on doing.
It's unclear who will speak out inside Russia with Mr. Navalny's death. There doesn't appear to be another opposition leader to fill that void. They're either dead, in jail, afraid. What do you think the consequences of this moment are inside Russia, and what do you think Mr. Navalny's legacy will be to the world?
I think there are more. David, I really think there are more Russian Democrats than any of us will ever know. There are more heroic people who are, yes, many of them are in prison and in jail, but many of them are working as quietly and effectively as they can. They have a conscience. They have beliefs. They have been fighting for liberty for a very, very long time in their country, indeed for decades and centuries. So there's many more of those people than we know, and we have to do everything we can to help them. But don't give up, because don't forget, people said that there were no dissenters in the Soviet Union and that there were no dissenters in Eastern Europe. And they were wrong. And Eastern Europe is now much freer than it has ever been as a result of the courage of people who believed in the fight for freedom and democracy. And that's what we have to remember. There are people in Russia who believe in freedom and democracy, and we have to do everything we can to support them.
Bob Rae, Canada's ambassador to the United Nations. Thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you, David. Thank you.